Okay, so back looking at 13, and what we've done since you were last here is fleshed out a few bits. So the coastline has now gotten a little bit of planting, which I think is tying it together quite nicely. Done a little bit of stuff up here, looked at crowds, and carried on with some of the rock work all the way around here, which is tedious and difficult just to make it not look messy, but I think this kind of works so far. Also, did this cove and experimented with trying some bigger rocks and whether those work. I think I'm going to have. One of the things I did look at was how much of the meter this was costing me, because there's a ton of rocks in between here and here in this 500 odd yard area. There's loads. Good news is I deleted all of the rocks on the plot to see how much that took, and that is under 1%. Now, that's 500 meters. I've got roughly 500 meters to, sorry, 500 yards. That's about the same as to there, then to there. Get a rough idea. I'm just doing it in 500-yard chunks. Yeah, let's call that it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, if I can do all of this in, that's at most, based on those numbers, going to cost me about 6%, which is pretty damn good for what we need to do, and given that's a major set piece of what we're going for. And also, given that most of the trees, I'm not going to have a ton underneath them other than just stuff blocking out this part. Crowds will also eat up a lot of the space, so I've had a little look at putting them in and how many we're going to have and where they'll stand, things like that. So around this one, it's kind of tricky. There's not that much space around the green, and yeah, I mean, I, yeah, I don't think I can put many more around that. Especially when there's fairway this side. I think on holes like 12, we can put a lot more because we can run these guys around here. And when we start playtesting and fleshing everything out, that'll all make a lot more sense. This area is probably going to be trees, creating a little corridor for 11, which then the aim with 11 is basically just going to be a skyline green. And then so that on 12, we've looked at through those trees, can we see the 11th green, which the more I can try to do that on a course and just tie things in together, the better, I think. So whether I'll move it even further back potentially, because this tee can really go anywhere. I've said in a number of the previous episodes, 11 will be whatever it needs to be. So that'll be one of the last holes done, I would think, unless I get a particular hankering to do that one. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. All I'm doing now. So I think a really important thing to do at this time, when you've got your look pretty close to settled, it's not absolutely nailed, but you've got an idea that the proof of concept is going to work. You've fleshed out a couple of holes. You want to make sure that you're not going to make any mistakes at this point and that you're doing everything about as efficiently as you can do. There's nothing worse than getting to the end and realizing there was a better alternative or you could have been doing something slightly differently. So we've looked at the amount of coastline we've got to cover. One thing I want to do is do that as efficiently as possible. I don't mind going round for a contest course. I'm happy taking my time and doing all of this stuff, but there might be a more efficient way of doing it. So one thing we're going to investigate is I decided to put some properties over here, partly to hide the edge of the plot. So that's something you want to see pretty early on. If you're going to go close to the edge of the plot, you want to make sure that that's not really visible, even if kind of people are hitting a wedge shot into this one and the camera flies up. Do you see all of that land that you don't really want people to? So that's why we tend not to put holes really close to the edge. We've managed it pretty nicely on this one, so I don't think you're ever going to see anything there, and you will see some of this stuff in the background, but there's enough stuff in front to probably distract you, and I just can't. There's nothing you can do about this, the way the game is, unfortunately. But we want to minimize that as much as we possibly can. So on the other side, we're going to do a little bit more of the rocky coastline that juts out. And one of the things I'm experimenting with a bit more now is the rocks and which ones can you use and what that, if you make them massive, how far do they go, what shapes, what sizes, etc. And there's no really good way of doing this because they start out very, very small, but you want to test how big they can get to and what shapes they're like when they're really large, and how well do they hold their resolution, and do they tessellate and things like that. And so I'm going to go through every single one that I've pulled off all of the rocks that I can think might work for this off of the main page, and we're just going to test them one by one. I've tested this one. I know I'm using this one, but not on coastline. So we're going to have a look at this one. Now, some of them go, this one actually seems to work quite quickly. Sometimes the rocks resize really, really slowly, but you can see it gets pretty big. Now, resolution-wise, I'll be looking at it from here while I'm kind of resizing it, and immediately in my head, I'm thinking this is possibly a little bit too low resolution. It's also, when we place it along the other ones, it's kind of the wrong color. It's too white. It's not really going to work. It stands out. You look at it along the coastline, it could work. I don't love that it's on the diagonal. I'm desperate to try some. Like, it's quite nice to have a mix, but I would really like to find something that's got more of a straight edge. So I don't think this is one I'm going to be using, but we're going to turn it around because they all have slightly different edges. And see what we can. Now, when I am placing these rocks, one of the things I'm trying to do is connect these like edges as much as you possibly can. Yeah, you can see on this side how low res it is compared to some of the others. This one's just got less to work with. So we're not going to use this one. And all we'll do, because I don't think I've placed it anywhere else, is I'm just going to delete it. Now have a look at the next one. Yeah, this one's resizing a little bit slower, but it is flatter at the top. It also has a little bit more of a color change. You can see there's a bit of a shadow on the bottom, but it's still quite low res. It also, you'll notice the curve out isn't great. This is very low res. It doesn't resize massively, but we could combine that if we needed to. Like, you can see how you could make that work. Again, though, I think probably a little bit too low resolution. So we're probably not going to use that one. One thing I learned from working with Jamie, so Golf Wolf on 17 Mile Club way back when, and talking about his sandbelt courses before that, was how you want to look at every aspect of an object. So how it looks when it's buried, how it looks when it's resized, and that's some of the stuff that he does really, really well. So I've tried to pick up from that. We're not going to use this one. So that one again can be deleted, but at least we know. Yeah. Now I'm not going to subject you to all of this, but we'll come back when I've done it all. Okay, and we're back, and I've tested almost all of them. So you can see I've gone through and put little ticks or crosses by each of them based on which ones I really like and which ones I maybe like a little bit less. I found a couple of really good ones that I hadn't been using. This one in particular, I think, was outstanding because it has a very, very flat top edge, which is really useful because it means that I can put it right up close to some of these vertical drops. So if I give this as an example here, and you see it's just not really coming through the floor. A lot of them just go gradual. So I can use this right at the very top, and then it's also quite straight, which means I can blend the bottom. I've also found a couple of little fun bits with these, moving these around. So in trying to then replicate, you can copy and paste, and what's cool is it doesn't keep the elevation, but it does keep the size, so I don't have to spend all of that time kind of redoing these rocks. But as you can see, this one will blend pretty nicely. So I can use that for one solid cliff face quite a lot of the time, and that's going to save a ton of time. It looks good from distance. That's going to be a really key piece. And actually, I could probably do the majority of the coastline with just this one. I won't, because there's other things. You want a bit of definition and what have you, but that's a great one. Another couple I've found that I really liked. So this one I was using a lot. So anything that's got 2 ticks are the ones where I'm just like, I really like that. Let's get that one back there. Some other cool ones. I think I'm just looking at my notes. So I made notes of on lots of these as well. So this one I quite liked as well, because when it blew up, it retained quite a lot of the definition, and it has a bit of a diagonal edge. So that allows me to make it more than just one vertical line. It allows me to kind of drop it down. All of this stuff is pretty experimental. I think it looks decent, and it might be something I come back and touch up at the end if I feel like it needs it. But actually, this is always going to be backdrop. I've been kind of redefining it as I go. So when I was blowing these up, what I was doing was kind of slotting them into this coastline and going, does this make it better? Does this make it worse? So I'd be putting things like here and going, yeah, do I like that? Do I not? But if we turned it around, and then you get an idea of how useful something actually is. And what you're really trying to do is make it as much as possible look like one piece with varying degrees of distinctions and changes. So like here, I quite like the way this top edge comes out. So can I link that up with this piece and then also with another piece where it makes it look, so it's kind of blending, because at the moment that's quite a stark transition. Well, it's okay, but can we make this better, basically? So I'll do things like this where I play with it and go, actually, how does that look from different angles? You can see it's kind of popping in a little bit of the light. I don't like that because none of the rest of it's doing it. So it's things like that that we're looking at. It is quite a sheer face, which again is good. You could have it popping out at certain bits. I think this is an interesting like additional piece that you could add in when you want a little bit more variety, because the sheer faces don't translate so well in game, particularly close up to the player. Yeah, I could certainly see it working something like there, where you've got that kind of weathered edge and dropping it down, etc. So that's one. I found another one that's very diagonal and has a limitation. Like it's got a really pointy side, which no matter how you spin it is always going to define this. So this side is kind of borderline unusable because we can never tie the terrain in at the top, because it's always going to be rising up and covering this side. So you'd have to spin it out this way, but there's some useful stuff here, and it could work quite nicely in covering. What this offers that a lot of the other pieces don't is that it goes diagonally and pretty sharply. So therefore, when I need to use that, let's say we've got a high to low piece around about here, well, this can cover that and match with the terrain pretty nicely. Obviously, we'll mesh the terrain to whatever rocks we need to use. We can do that after the fact, but I quite like using the terrain as a guideline of where I need these. So there's four that I still haven't tried, and what I thought I'd do would be to chuck on a time lapse of how I go about trying these. And that's these four. They go really, really huge and tall, and they comfortably would cover an entire cliff face. So the most I'm ever going to need is 70 feet. And these cover that very easily, but they're very different shapes to what I'm used to. So like if we look at here, easily doing all that I need, but they're very, very sheer. So what I'm going to need to do is really work with the land first and then see how they actually translate. So I figured that would be quite a cool one to kind of time lapse and see how we go. And because they're quite narrow, it's then going to be about how they match and join up with one another. And so we'll just have a little bit of a test play. And this is not something I'm expecting to stay as final planting. It's just really getting to understand how the objects work together, which I think is vital for what we're trying to do. Okay, so it's been a little while since I recorded one of these, and part of that is because there's been a lot of trial and error stuff. And I don't think that's really worth recording because there's a lot of me deleting stuff and trying over again. So in that time, what we've done is we built out 3 and we built out 4. And 4 in particular took a ton of reworking. 3 came out pretty nicely and quickly. So 3 is a short 400 odd yard par 4 that plays very downhill. However, it's one of the most awkward tee shots I've come up with in quite some time. And it needs some playtesting, and so I thought that would be a good point to leap in and start re-recording. What I tend to do for when I start getting into a plot, you want to have that proof of concept. So if you remember, we started looking at 13 and 12 and working those together, and those are pretty close. There's bits I don't like about them that we'll redo, but they're not far off. I then wanted to go to get the barranca bit sort of there. So I've done some test planting with this. I kind of wish the grass was a little less scrappy, and the same with some of these bushes that, if you can see, they pop out and they look really kind of they separate, for lack of a better word, I guess. But I think that's going to work pretty nicely, and it gives the vibe I want it to. It's not going to be sandy; it just kind of has that base texture. Then the bunkering, I think we're really getting on top of now. The jagged shapes and kind of those work pretty nicely. And then there's a little extension of kind of a low area over here, which again makes sense with the plot. This one, as strategy goes, it's basically hit the fairway. It's really tough, actually, to hit the fairway with driver. And really a layup I would prefer anyway, because you get a full wedge into a green that slopes hard front to back. If you're looking at the slope, or the full extent of it, you're looking at 5 feet really of elevation, 3, 4. If you're looking from there, 4-3 from there. And actually, if you're looking at playable surface, it's only about 2 feet. There's just a really steep drop off at the back, but it's quite a small green anyway. So you want as much control as you possibly can do. With that in mind, you'll be wanting to probably challenge these bunkers off the tee. So I thought I'd come back in and show you a little bit of playtesting and things that we do now. So most of it's there. I do think this slope might be a little bit severe, but it's hard to know with major. That'll be something we look at kind of later on and go, well, how severe is 2, how severe is 3, things like that. And I do want to emphasize the option of getting to this kind of plateau and like leaving that layup, if not totally open, like you still want the challenge there of going at these bunkers, but like, I want people to consider the layup. Now, one thing we do want to do with a particularly downhill shot is making sure that that sightline works. So as you can see, all of this is geared around just sightline and kind of making it gently slope, but still being flattish. So that if you were to lay out with 5 wood, you're not just seeing the grass in front of you, basically. And what this will also do quite nicely is start gently softening that hog's back that we've got, which I think is a good thing. It does work as a concept, and it makes those drives tricky. But that looks a little less manufactured now. And I do want you to sense that slope off the tee. So we're trying to lower this side a little as well. Make it really clear that the left side of the fairway is not safe. Essentially, the actual fairway width is pretty much from here to here. So it's only about 20 yards, and then you're also running through. And even if you do take that on, you're left with a pitch or a flop to this green, which for me isn't necessarily ideal. So that's that. Let's see, we'll just do a quick pass at the bunkers. Because of how I'm doing these, I'm going to want to go back in and keep checking the sculpting regularly. They're such finicky shapes, and you kind of have to start sculpting them before you get an idea of whether they fit or not. And I don't always fully sculpt as I'm going and just keep checking as we come back. And you occasionally get this bit. You can see how there's a little rise in the sand. The bit that causes this is if you look at the brushes we're using, they're not going to, if you looked at all of them, they're not going to make this shape. Like, it's showing as this shape, but not all of this is bunker texture. So we place a little circle brush, you can see it pops down. And you don't want to do it too close to the edges, otherwise you lose that jagged shape that you've worked so hard to make. But we do want it to actually be a bunker and not just like someone. I don't think you ever draw a heavy rough lie out of the bunker with this, but if you're ever finding you're fighting random little puffs in the sculpting, that's kind of the reason why. Lower this a touch. And my one tendency with this is often to make the bunkers a little too deep. So it's worth being aware of those. Just like you get so focused on working it from here and these angles that you don't necessarily check back from the tee. I do want it, if you go into the bunker, you do roll down. This usually works. A lot of techniques from sandbelt bunkering, really, for this one, even though they're very different styles. You kind of take what you've learned, and there's loads of it for the shaping and how they present off the tee as well as the sculpting. Cool. Yeah, we could probably use just making this a touch more visible. The other benefit of doing it this way is obviously that a ball hit too close to the bunker will roll in, and it opens up the view of the bunker as well, which is quite nice. Probably need to raise the back of this one. Right. That should do us for the moment. Now we're going to go medium and north. I think that was a fun wind for the next hole. So you're getting an idea of how things are kind of piecing together. So from this tee, what I quite liked was focusing the view. So this is going to be the fifth tee, and we're going to have a big kind of spectator area around here. So you've got some big grandstands, then there's concessions area behind it. You get a view to the clubhouse, which I like. You get the little view of the bridge that crosses the Barranca, which ties in the external environment again. Views to the grandstands on 17. So there's lots you see and that kind of hive of activity, which is one of the things that I really like about our tournament style course. So you can see the challenge of off the tee. We can hit driver. This wind means I actually could maybe take it down the left and just use the wind to bring it back in. I think that's running the risk of rolling off. One thing I'm experimenting with as well is zero roll on fairways and seeing how much that actually provides. Okay, so if we've done that, well, now we're in a really bad situation. So we have a full lob wedge at least, but we're in heavy rough. So he's 75%, a green that we really want control coming into. I'm just going to try and get it on the green. Actually a pretty good shot. Now this green was definitely spicy and needed toning down, so I wonder whether I've done enough. Pretty good. Yeah, before this was just a sea of orange, whereas now it looks a little bit better. I have also maxed out the green speeds to where I want them to be, so I'm going to play test a bunch on 155s. That's fast. I'm not going to go above that. And then this is 4. So 4, you go off the third green and then play there. Ignore the rock and most of the coastline. A lot of that's been just playing with copy and paste and things like that. So what I've been trialing with this, I've redone this coastline like 3 times already. And the thing that I found that's been the most successful is taking some of these rocks and moving them diagonally, so that you see more of the face and it gets that kind of gradual transition down. The thing that works really nicely about Pebbles coastline and gives it so much of its, like, those coastline holes, the variety and reputation they've got, is they're at different heights. Like you've got some low sections of coast, you've got high, and it kind of changes. So we're going to try and do bits of that. Planting over the top has helped. Lighting with this hole is about as brutal as it's going to get on the course. This green is also definitely in need of softening, but this pin I figured was about as tough as it'll ever be. And if I soften a bit at 155s, that'll work. So what this one's really asking for this pin is just like the question is, if you want to get close, you are hitting way over here. What I do need to sort is like the bailout, so this section of the green, so like just let people hit to the middle of the green. But we will have a pin up here on a little bit of a shelf, so I need something there, and I kind of want this bit here to force you to go a bit further right, and I want this bit here so that if you go straight at it but a little bit left, it does feed you round. Because if you go too far left, you're in the bunker. Too far right is obvious. Oblivion. Short is a safe miss. Even with a slow, wind should pull us back in. Like, that's a very safe way to play the hole. But you end up making birdie from there. Yeah, 2 feet, this probably needs slowing down a little. And planting behind the green, I thought looked pretty solid there. One thing I will be unable to sort properly is the red slopes off the edge of the green. I'll minimise them as much as I can, but it's just the way the game renders green grid squares. And that's the sort of putt I want a lot on this course. Not necessarily the roll-off way afterwards, but like the 3-footers not being gimmies and being really dicey. Okay, so that's kind of what we've done so far. Now, play testing, we're going to have a look at all 4 pins on 3. So let's go slightly different wind direction, play hole 3 again. Okay, so this wind, I think it's actually an easier proposition. You can see this, the softening we've done in that spine actually means driver's much more of a play, I think, now. That's gone through to the right, though, I think, although wind probably drops it. Yeah, so different wind, that goes all the way through. This wind's probably the easiest for this hole. That said, we've left ourselves a pitch in from a downslope to a green that runs away, so there's definitely challenge there. Let's try. Hopefully that little bit of spin controls it. It rolls out just a little. Yeah, looks fine. It's going to be trying to find that balance. Like this one could possibly be a little bit spicier, but probably challenging enough. What happens if we miss? Good. Okay, so that's one thing. Other thing I've been trying to change has been like this would previously roll through to the rough. So trying to raise this up enough around the cliffside was tough. Chip back up. Benefit of this is we get to see the pin from a slightly different angle. Again, nothing yellow around it. It's just light green and consistent. So challenging, but nothing too bad. Long views look good. Oh. I'm not going to bother with 4. I'm just going to focus on 3. Okay, we're going to change to south and 2. And all of it is just trying to hit. So this wind, I would imagine, would be probably the toughest. So I'm going to hit 3 wood. Oh, there's the very... I wonder whether that clings on. It shouldn't do. It's about how... Yeah. That feels kind of fair as to how that's balanced. Absolutely dead from there, but I think if you miss the fairway with a 3 wood, I'm okay. So that's found that kind of flatter channel, but it does sneak through into that slightly awkward stance. These will not end up, I won't do back pins for both round 1 and 2, but they were the ones I wanted to test the most, therefore I put them on 1 and 2. That's found that falls back. Just check it collects. Yep. Definitely preferring the roll settings on the fairway since we've softened those. Let's try having another little go at the approach shot. What about if I did hit a pitch shot in? How does that release? So no spin, just as is, because I kind of want this to be a pin you roll the ball towards. Oh, there we go. Game. Oh, now it gives me this default sand wedge. Okay. I think that was going maybe a little fast. Let's chuck a bit of loft. Spin. So that's a bit too much to the left, so that should feed further left. And stay. That's a bit I want to be making sure we can keep that ball on the green. So that false back is just biting a tiny bit too much. It's okay. This part of design is vital for me, particularly for this sort of a course where you want to be absolutely certain of what you're doing. How a shot's reacting, does it seem fair? At least for the level of fair we're going for. If you can control a full wedge from that lie, you've got a pretty good chance. But it's 2 shots that if you're not thinking and really paying attention and executing, then I would be a decent score. Yeah, so there we hit a lazy shot and we're through the bag. And that's again a chip shot that's fine. You've got more chance to hedge your bets this way. Much more green to work with if you go straight at it. Doable, but you don't want to go long. I wonder what I can probably sculpt this bit a tiny bit more aggressively. Means that the ball rolls off there, because if you're going to end up down there a lot, I'd quite like that little potential of going back and forth. Okay, so we've done 5 minutes or so just looking at this. All I'm going to do at this point, clear the mesh tools. things that I would note, I would like a little bit more green space just around about here. I want this to be sculpted more, a little harder at least. It's kind of it as far as the green's concerned. I can flatten out this bit a touch. Whilst I'm all for random sloping, I don't really want a just weird dip just in front of the bunker. A little flattening and just some gentle raises just to get it about right. Okay, so sorting this one out. Now, two ways we can do it. Either we could flatten from the top, but that kind of drags this slope towards it. And I've got most of this slope the way I want. It's just this one that I need to sort. So the way I would do this is just raise up just on the inside of it. And you'll see it slowly. Now, this has a bit of a dual benefit. One, it's going to make the ball stop a little quicker just before it gets here because we've raised up. And secondly, when it does hit that, because I've raised up this bit but not this bit, that gradient's now steeper. Therefore, it's going to keep rolling further. Now for this one, because it's in such a small little area, we can go for a very jagged brush that's just going to get that rolling right off. That didn't need much, but it does need a little bit of working with the area around it. And I want to cover up some of the rock edges as much as I can. And my intention is with the cliffs just to try to plant on top of them where at all possible. I think that hides some of this transition that isn't great. Okay, was there any other aspect to this I want to change? I don't think so yet. Maybe we're going to leap in and play. Let's play pin 2 again and miss long and see what happens. So, and let's go with a 5 wood. Imagine you hit that. Safe as possible play off the tee. You're definitely finding the fairway, but you are giving up a lot of distance. Still have a wedge in though, so it's a viable shot. Slope should mean it goes a little further and it pulls to the left. If you airmail this green, you're screwed. Can't do much about that. So even a gap wedge really flies. Yep, we want to sort out that little bit of sculpting at the bottom. But yeah, that's not a chip I would want. I don't love that it's now flowing. So these couple of beads kind of going back against us, I don't love. So that shouldn't grab. That should go through into that runoff. Collects nicely. I could maybe soften that a little at the bottom. Don't really want anyone seeing that as a lie. Yep. A little bit of flattening to do in locations, but I'm pretty happy with that for the most part. Okay. There was an area down here where I just dived off, didn't I? Yeah. Actually, let's just do a little flatten down the bottom. Got the steep bit where I want it to. work a little better. Still past this I don't love. This bit. Can lower a little. Can this raise any more? A load of sculpting for me really just boils down to patience. It's like, does the person who's designing care enough? In some instances, yeah, some of it is skill and just an experience with the tools. A lot of the time, it's just like, have you cared enough to look at all of these things and to make sure that they're right? And it's this sort of stuff is sculpting that most people will never see, but there will be one person who finds themselves here. And you'll be amazed, like the first few playthroughs of your courses you get, there's always people end up in spots you never ever imagined were possible. So it's for that I'm just like, oh, I'd rather spend a little bit more effort. I mean, if you have airmailed the screen, you've made the biggest mistake possible. But what can we do? Let's just do a little what if moment. And it's worth looking at these sometimes. Because this back area is quite high. What if the whole green was sunk down a couple of feet? How would that look? Even a foot. Let's smooth that out pretty significantly. Maybe half a foot. So with this sort of stuff, all we're trying to do is capture the whole green. And I'll often do this with greens or areas of fairways. 7 is good. And then just look at it visually. Does it work? I think so. Let's look at the back. About the same, but a little better. It buys me a little more space to work with. I think I prefer that. This bunker was pretty steep anyway. And same thing with this one. Again, anytime you're looking over, just can you spot anything that's obviously wrong? A little bit of sand here. Cool. And save. When we've done finicky sculpting stuff that I might not remember doing, it's like that sort of stuff is the stuff that you really hate losing in crashes, stuff that you won't necessarily remember whether you've done it or not, and you'll second guess whether it's there or not. Sort this bit out. And so that's kind of playtesting in a nutshell. It's like going through a few things. What about high winds? High and west. Ooh. A dead downwind. Driver is not the play. 3 wood will get you a long way down. To a front pin. I want to be far side of the fairway there. So I'm hoping. I wonder if this kicks right. Shouldn't. Good. Okay, so we've got as much of an angle as we're likely to get. So I need to soften this bit a touch. Right between sand wedge and lob wedge. Try and take a little off of. Still not quite it. Tough flag to get at least for me. I figure if I can do it, like for what we're doing for major, if I can do it a couple of times, flat guys will be able to replicate that most times. It's not that there isn't a shot, it's just that the shot has very difficult values. Just get on the green this time, shall we? Interested to see how this one does. So no spin. Yeah, I think that's about how I'd want it. It's doable, just tough. Cool. So that gives you a bit of an idea of what we look at when we're playtesting and the sorts of like the level of detail I would typically go into with all bits of sculpting, because none of those changes have been major, but they will affect how it plays. And we'll kind of keep doing that. And I find it very important to play in little stretches. So when I've got the second built out, I'll go 2, 3, 4, and try and feel how do those flow. Am I testing slightly different shots? I mean, we definitely will. 2 is a long downhill par 4, 3 is a short par 4, 4 is an all carry par 3. So yeah, should be different. But it gives you an idea of what we look for.